Hi, this is author-philosopher Ronald E. Springer of EthicsUnderground.com here to continue the reading of Moral Armor. Chapter 8, Part 17, The Fixed and the Fluid. Please hit like and subscribe before we dive in. The fear-driven simplify standards by not having any. Actually, standards are unavoidable to any human, and theirs are defined as usual by default. Early on, they identify the good as any value experienced which requires no effort. The evil is anything they fear, and whatever causes them to face it. Often that's as far as they take it, and naturally the mind falls into the latter category. Parasitical from day one, believing all are tied to all, standards become not primarily existential, but social. And backwards, they look to their social links to define what is existential. Too lethargic to form standards on their own, they live off of what others have created, involve themselves in others as a purpose, and look to others to form their values. People tell them what the world is, and in fear of facing it alone, they accept what is told to them secondhand. Disconnected from fundamental judgment, they must pursue self-worth by gauging their own adherence to exoskeletal frames. The fear-driven typically avoid the physical sciences, away from any association with an emphasis on true standards where such observation could blend into their psychology to positively reinforce their emotional control. In the sciences, the rules are rigid. They do not account for fears and remain unaltered by tantrums, pleas for mercy or patience, and that poses too many questions. 2 + 2 = 4 has no give. It simply is. It can't be cheated, lied to, or threatened, and this provokes the most extreme discomfort in a spirit murderer. It exists outside his power, outside his world. The world will pay no tribute to a man and grant no harvest without his understanding of it. To understand it is to exercise an attribute of self, and the concept of self is their enemy. Science wipes out their whole basis of reality, an unconscionable threat. They intend to negate facts and stick with rootless opinions. So in effect, all standards remain in flux, as they vary from person to person, influence to influence. For the fear-driven, standards of good and evil remain whatever they want them to be, and magically adjust in pace with their own degeneration. An actual standard is a means to gauge adherence to a principle, placing the measurable attributes of an entity along an applicable scale of unit value. An anti-standard is a rejection of the capacity to measure, a stature granted automatically, not requiring effort or mind. Morally, it is the rejection to stand alone, along a scale of virtue. A false standard negates all liabilities of the individual, while providing the individual with rewards. It glorifies his current state as the pinnacle point of departure, molding itself to fit rather than permitting valuations where room for improvement could be seen. This simply means that if he is to determine a hierarchy, he is only to look down. Relative standards between what the men around him uphold, oddly enough defined by the true standards, are all he can see, and ignoring all above him, he compares himself to the lowest to say, "I'm not that bad." Being higher doesn't hide that he needs to compare himself to the deplorable. He feels no need to be as high on the proper scale as possible, as is the quest of a self-made man, but only a smidgen above the stature of others, which too is often a lie. As his self-esteem is derived from others, his herd instinct of not outdistancing the pack is of greater value to him and quells all desires to rise. Their justification can be found in the saying, "Everybody does it." Standards of relativity are the tools of the unself-worthy. They have no self and gain no esteem from climbing the ladders of virtue, as there is no self to please. An anti-standard must allow no adherence to itself, adjusting the target to suit their flawed aim, like moving the basket to catch any wild shot. Reality, as far as they're concerned, must bend to account for their moods, emotions, and tantrums. You can imagine them in their threatened misery, yelling, "This is happiness! I am happy, damn it!" They ignore that the problem exists and could be solved, because the only means to the solution is the enemy they dread, cognition. And the first hurdle to clear is accepting what their default has done to their pride. Chickening out instead, their false route to esteem drives them to claim that there is no default, that the mind is capable of anything, that concepts can be whatever one wants them to be, and that there are no fixed means in body or spirit by which a man must live. Close off one nostril, and you'll know how simply and drastically it will affect your life. Existence matters. It all matters, but they need to believe our brains have no structure or form, as if they were liquid. The reason? A dual motive again. First, to fix the impossibility of addressing what they fear, allowing to remain fluid only what aids their game. Second, As a death premise breeds dependency, and dependency requires victims, they fix the restraints to move freely over the soon-to-be corpse. From a spirit murderer, you'll hear nothing but approximations about facts and final verdicts about unknowable dementia. The fixed is not the world he cannot change, the rotation of the earth, gravity, and the new truths of nature that science reveals every day. The fixed is his desired superiority over nature, the power to tell nature what it is and demand that it oblige. He fights to nullify the rational process of validation, the commitment to reality, the process he fears, and fixes his inability to perform. He fixes the impossibility of personal action that goes without question, but his excuses remain dynamic, as do the accused sources of his own guilt. His emotions are free to run wild, and are to determine how reality must submit at his every random turn. For a group whose slogan is "There are no absolutes," they hold as utterly absolute the impossibility to pin any responsibility on themselves. He holds fixed his own barriers to progress, a human's capacity for talent, his opinions, assumptions, and what knowledge he has worked for. He has no tolerance for it to change, to always advance as science does. It is either fixed or it is wrong, because in fact it has been memorized, not understood. He can't catch it unless it stands still. You can feel the lack of foundation to his assertions, always delivered offhand, tainted with belligerence or condescension as if self-evident, to avoid questioning. Part of its indication is the forbearance not to look past its utterance, somehow aware that a void would be faced. Whenever he rides the edge, he freezes, frightened at the extent of his knowledge. But this is the threshold of learning, the pioneering step, considered great adventure by the self-made. Either an individual questions and explores all that has gone before to validate and build on it, or he shuts his mind to secure the illusions of its validity, and can take no steps alone. The sad truth is that in his knowledge he might be right, but he'll never reach conviction, being unwilling to identify the elements of his view. Fear overcomes him, and memorization is his way around it. He submits to the teachings without question, feeling he has no right and no capacity to question, and upon reaching a position of authority, he then denies that right and capacity to others. Spirit murderers cannot afford admitting to an accurate definition of good and evil. They wish to allow no clean, rational view of innocence on one side or total contamination on the other. They see no need to go to extremes, in other words, no need for purity and no need to disinfect. Whenever I hear this, I think of the research laboratories or the dust and dirt-free environment of the Space Shuttle preloading bay. I think of micrometers and other precision instruments measuring phenomena well beyond our sensory grasp. I think of the complex readouts on digital displays, where some minuscule variation can make a room full of scientists cheer or rise in astonishment. I think of my constant pursuit of pure, moral clarity and all it has given me. No need? The fear-driven imply that the pursuit of exacting standards is a manic, destructive interest such as those of Nazi skinheads, but it obviously is not. Still, a goal-driven man is treated as an outsider because his creations are accomplished alone. The pack had nothing to do with it. They unite to lie, cheat, and hate, not to produce. The only extreme their pack ever partakes in is slaughter. The pursuit of pushing the rational envelope cannot be taken out of context. In this realm, it gauges adherence to a principle. Therefore, another word for extreme in this context is true. Extreme fitness is good. Extreme beauty, love, devotion to truth, accuracy, purity, physical awareness, knowledge, happiness, bounty are all powerful forces that serve the living if one is willing to gather and practice them. Then again, living is not always one's intention. To avoid extremism is to avoid white and black in the context of identification, which is to avoid exactness. They say, we are all just shades of gray, except for the best, and of course, the worst. Acknowledging the best imposes a fundamental obligation and a brave honesty beyond most, the act of reverence. Not acknowledging the best is part reproach, in defiance of those who are truly alive and truly moral, part cowardice, in the attempt to dodge a valid guilt. Not acknowledging the worst is a psychological limitation, but driven by the irrational dread of discovering a mirror image, which is also valid. To permit no extremes means nothing is quite hard or soft, but remains shapeless and undefinable, reflecting the content of their consciousness. Such object, a lifeless, spineless blob, cannot be projected like an arrow can. It cannot gather any inertia, and never does. Therefore, it poses no threat to the esteem of a spirit murderer. The whole intention of moral armor is to glorify and preserve the spirit of the highest type of human being, the arrow, the self-made man, and his possibility exists only because there is a hard, clear, realistic extreme to aspire to, the moral purity of seeking the life-furthering path in all things. Not to measure each man by an elastic standard, as life does not grade on a curve, but for each entity seeking to enjoy its existence at the height of its own capacity, whatever that may be. A byproduct of this is to publicly shatter any false esteem such proponents of the gray lay claim to. The last grasp they have on the spirit of man, the only power they ever had, their sacred moral inversion will fall to me. The game is up. We know what you are doing, and there will be nowhere left to hide. But there is a big difference in how we will deal with our enemy. They will not be put to death, as is the ultimate social goal of the fog summoners, but the greatest horror for the spirit murderer, to be put to work in the service of earning their own esteem by civil means. No longer will a cushion be allowed between cause and effect for the immoral. For once they will face the true consequences of their theories and practice. Those who are willing will learn that there is nothing to be afraid of. Those who aren't will be their only victims. That's all for now. Next up is the third phase of a spirit murderer's consciousness, evasive action, perversion of purpose. I split these videos up by subject so you'd have a better chance of finding moral armor, and then perhaps go through the whole thing for free. Why? To help create a leader in every life. Sound civilization stair-steps up from sound coherence, to sound individual, to productive groups of mature individuals. Self-hatred drives fear-driven people in our world to wipe out the individual, so we all need moral armor to protect ourselves and the future of mankind. Click subscribe and leave a thumbs up if you'd like to help wipe out moral confusion fast and make the world a better place.